Trigger warning. This video discusses domestic violence.
Hi, you've reached Suzanne. Please leave me a message and I'll get back with you as soon as I can. Thank you.
I get the impression that Suzanne was very much a feminine, girly girl, so I'm going to try to tell her story in that manner. Once upon a time, in what seems to me like a land far, far away, there lived a stunningly beautiful junior high school undergrad named Suzanne Morphew. By all accounts given to date, Suzanne grew up with a peaceful nature, gracious, quiet, eager to please, and rarely oppositional. But don't take my word for it. Listen to what someone who has known her since birth has to say.
That we were both born on the same day, April 30th, and we were born 15 years apart. And I was a 56 model and she was a 71 model. You know, the significance does not escape me. I was so thrilled to have a sister and having two brothers. And she came along at a very, I would say it this way, very untimely in terms of my mom and dad's relationship at the time was very seriously impaired. And I think my mom had tremendous amounts of fear bringing another child into the world, number 4, you know, and she was spending a lot of time alone. And so these were difficult times for her. But I can say that Suzanne's birth was a timely blessing in our family. And she brought nothing but great joy to our family and to many of our elderly relatives, which my mom had a slew of, and we all adored her from day one. But you know, she was like our little paper doll. We started dressing her, you know, as a little girl, and she had many elderly relatives who were great aunts who had not had children. So she was the benefactor of lots of clothes, right? And we all dressed her and just treated her like a doll that she was in our family. One of the memories, I guess, is I would just say that Suzanne from the womb was a completely compliant child. She just beautifully compliant person. You know, there was nothing of defiance in her character at all. My sister was as predictable as the sun coming up in the east and going down in the west. There was not a wild card in her character. This beautiful compliance. Now, she had her little ways. If you made her mad like I could do, she had her ways of kind of, you know, subtly getting back. But it was always very gracious and very quiet. It would never be, you know, in your face or anything like that. But you knew you'd made her mad or hurt her feelings, and you stepped in a little bit. She'd let you know. But overall, her temperament was beautiful. And as a child, she was completely compliant. I mean, she never gave anyone a moment's heartache or hardship at all. Her personality was just bent that way completely.
By Suzanne's own account, she was just a, quote, broken girl looking for stability, unquote, with little confidence in herself when she met what she thought was her prince, a senior high school graduate named Barry.
What I understand is that Barry and Suzanne met. My parents built a home on the golf course called Fairway Estates. and it's right in the middle of a golf course there in Alexandria. And it was a new subdivision, and they bought the first lot there, so they built a home. And Suzanne met Barry. He worked for the golf course, and as I understand, his job was to take one of the carts and he checked the sprinklers at night. Checked all the sprinkler heads to make sure everything was in good working order. And I think I find my memory serves me, Suzanne would have been about a junior in high school. Of course, Barry, being older, had already graduated from high school. But he would pick her up in his golf cart, and they would check the sprinklers together on the golf course. And so that's how their dating really started. And yeah. And so I think my sister certainly was attracted to that. He was a very, very, he was a very handsome guy. He had it all together, and the nice car and perfect hair. We like that hair, and very popular. And yeah, and so they made a darling couple, that's for sure.
Almost immediately, Suzanne's prince charmed her into joining his own church, ultimately turning her back on a Methodist upbringing to become a fundamentalist Baptist. It was in this church where they finally married in 1994, and her family did notice some changes in Suzanne's nature over this period.
It was a very beautiful wedding. Suzanne and Barry were both people of faith, and strong faith at that. And Suzanne had started to attend church with Barry, as I recall. She was raised more to the Methodist persuasion there in Alexandria. My mom was a lifelong member of the United Methodist Church in Alexandria. But when Suzanne met Barry, it seemed that she took on more of his faith tradition, which was more, I would say, of a fundamentalist Baptist background. And that was what she chose to do. And so her wedding, I do remember she was kind of upset with me. I'll tell a little funny story, because these are the things that sisters get into, I guess. But I had come for the wedding, and my mother had said to me that she wasn't real pleased with the dress she'd chosen. She just didn't feel as comfortable in it. And I said, well, Mom, that's no problem. Let's just take it back and you get something that you like. And so we went to the dress shop, and I helped my mother, and she found a beautiful chiffon. It was just very elegant, kind of a peach color, but it was like a palazzo pant instead of a dress. And but it looked like a long gown when she wore it. My mom looked stunning in it. She loved that. So I said, Mom, wear what you're comfortable in. I was always telling her, yeah, Mom, I'm her cheerleader, And so she did. We got to the church, and Suzanne saw her in these palazzo pant kind of outfit. And she got mad at me because she thought I talked her out of wearing a dress to a fundamentalist Baptist wedding. That was kind of a little standing joke, don't tell your mother to wear something anyway. So that's just one of those little things sisters get into. But my mom liked what she was wearing. But there again, it reminded me that Suzanne had taken on a more legalistic, fundamentalist thinking.
Yep.
And had given up that liberty of, hey, it's okay to wear something beautiful, even if it is, pants. So that, to me, that was very important for me to remember. And I saw that change in Suzanne early on in her relationship with Barry, which I think plays into so much of their ongoing relationship over the years.
Approximately 2 years prior to wedlock, Suzanne was diagnosed with a very rare form of Hodgkin's lymphoma. It was through her early battle with this disease that Barry would win the hearts and minds of Suzanne's entire family, ultimately causing any future discussions of marriage problems and or fear for her life to fall on deaf ears.
I did a little math today, and it looks to me like she was a junior. Now, this would have been prior. She was married in 1994, August. She also graduated Purdue that same year in 94. She was diagnosed, as I recall, in about 92. She was a junior, I believe, at Purdue when the diagnosis of this lymphoma came to her. She was either a sophomore or junior, right in there, 91, 92 would have been. And at that time, she was right in full swing of college. And the diagnosis was an old age lymphoma is what they called it. It's very, very unusual, very unusually not found in someone Suzanne's age. So there were a little bit of a conundrum on how to treat someone that young. She would have been 21 years old with an old age lymphoma, you know. So I recall my dad wanted to get a second opinion. And so he drove her to Mayo's in his van, loaded her up and took her to Mayo's in Rochester, Minnesota to get a second diagnosis. And certainly they did confirm the diagnosis that it was an old age lymphoma. She came back to Indiana and then they began the treatment for that lymphoma for Suzanne. So she would have started her chemotherapy about a junior in college, 21 years old. So, you know, it would have been maybe an 18-month to 2-year situation. Suzanne was very, very ill. As you've seen pictures of her, she was very, very petite, slight built, not an ounce of fat on her. And she was very, you know, she wasn't, what do I want to say? I don't want to say delicate, but she's a very refined, you know, build and small build. And the chemo was very, very hard on her. Extremely hard on her. She was a very pure person. So those drugs hit her very hard. My mother at the time and my dad had divorced. So it was my mother and my sister in the home there on Fairway living together. And of course, Barry was there as well and would not have been, and was, you know, on board and completely supportive of Suzanne through her chemo. And I recall my conversations with my mother more than anything, how grateful my mother was for Barry's support, and that he during that time he was a strength. He was a strength to Suzanne, but also to my mother. And I recall her saying that Suzanne got so sick. My mother thought she would die from the treatment. Really, that's how sick she got, and she lost so much weight and was unable to eat. And I recall my mother saying that Barry would carry her through the house. That big, strong guy would pick her up, carry her like a little baby from one point to another because she was too weak to walk. A lot of guys would have run the other way, but he did not. And in that regard, in my family, Barry Morphew became a hero. You know, he was a hero. You know, one thing I know about my sister is that she was raised by my mother, and she and my mother were so very similar in temperament. And they both were very private people. They internalized things. They did not share easily or very much. It took a lot for them to share what was on their heart. So I think that, you know, I think Suzanne lived a lot of years believing that you keep things to yourself. You know, certain things you just don't talk about, unfortunately. And I think the culture and even the atmosphere of her church family also lended itself to that type of thinking. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It just, to me, is that people become very private. And I think that things did start to change way before any of us recognized it because of that. Because Suzanne did not openly share, not even with my mother.
Barry, being the avid hunter and trapper, sought a remote lifestyle that supported his own pastimes. Without a second thought towards Suzanne's medical fragility, he would later say, "All I did was work or hunt, and she had idle time. Idle hands are the devil's tools. She had 21 years of doing absolutely nothing."
You know, Barry was also a trapper and a hunter, and excellent trapper, you know, and I don't know, I'm going to guess that he probably put himself through Purdue University. Nobody did it for him. So he's a very hard worker that way. But they lived in some darling little farm properties, rentals. I know Suzanne loved that house. It was, there was a solitude to it and a beauty all around it, the landscaping and the house itself. And, you know, it's funny because sometimes Barry would be gone. He would go hunting, maybe out west or whatever. She'd be there with the girls. And I know my parents were always concerned that she was there by herself. And aren't you a little fearful of being, my dad wanted her to get a big dog, but Barry didn't want to have any dogs because of his wildlife situation and hunting. But I know my parents would have loved for her to have a big old German Shepherd out there or something. They did finally put in an electric gate.
At a time when Suzanne was finally finding herself, feeling more assertive and setting some personal boundaries, Barry set about isolating her from her friends, family, and social support system, as abusive folk often do to regain control. But before we continue on with this story, I want to familiarise you with the wheel of power and control. It's part of the cycle of violence, so let's start there.
Another tool for understanding abuse is the cycle of violence. Domestic violence often happens in a cycle, but this cycle can look different in every relationship. The cycle begins with the honeymoon phase. During this time, you and your partner may become very close emotionally. Your partner may make you feel special, important, cared for, and safe. Once the honeymoon phase starts to fade away, the cycle can move into the tension building phase. This can be a period of growing pressure, mood swings, demands, or rejection. The power and control behaviors mentioned earlier start to emerge. You may feel like you're walking on eggshells, and you can tell that something is about to happen. Once the tension reaches a breaking point, the cycle moves on to the explosive stage. This is when abusers become violent. The explosive episodes can be physical, like pushing, grabbing, or punching. An explosive incident may also not include any physical violence, but instead involve verbal abuse, making threats, or carrying out threats. However, the explosive phase doesn't last forever. The cycle eventually returns to the honeymoon phase, where your partner may bring you gifts, apologize, give you physical affection, and make promises to change. During this phase, it feels like everything is back to normal, or that the relationship can begin again. Over time, though, the honeymoon phase may become shorter or fade entirely, and the abuse may become more severe. Why does the cycle continue? Most relationships are based on love, and people may have hope that things will change in time or go back to the way they were. Many people may not realize this kind of behavior is abuse, and they may also be afraid of what might happen if they try to leave.
What we've heard so far is that during her first bout of cancer, she and Barry were in the honeymoon phase. Melinda described Suzanne's close and emotional connection to Barry and feeling cared for and safe during this time. Unbeknownst to her family members, the relationship entered the tension building phase. We'll cover this a little bit later in more detail, with text messages that were exchanged between Sheila and Suzanne in the months after moving to Colorado, as well as some other details that Sheila divulged during her interviews with law enforcement. And then from the same sources of information, we will find out that the relationship had entered the explosive stage before the move to Colorado. In the coming episodes, we're going to track the power and control segments of this diagram as it applies to information we have gathered about the relationship. Here's a rundown of what we'll be looking for.
The outside of the wheel represents the physical and sexual abuse that can sometimes be part of domestic violence. The inside of the wheel represents the non-physical kind of behaviors someone might use to try to control their partner or family member. These include intimidation. Intimidation can be in the form of threatening looks or gestures, displaying weapons, destroying your property, or hurting or threatening to harm or take pets. Emotional abuse. Emotional abuse can include behaviors like humiliating or bullying you, playing head games, or manipulating you, and spiritual abuse. Isolation. Isolation means controlling or limiting what you do, who you see, or who you talk to. It can also include cutting you off from family and friends. Your partner may use jealousy to justify their behavior. Denying, minimizing, or blaming. Abusers may refuse to take responsibility for their actions or redirect blame. This can look like making fun of the abuse, saying it didn't happen, or saying the abuse is your fault. Using children. Your partner may try to maintain power and control over you through your children. They might try to blame the children for the abuse, try to turn the children against you, or threaten to take the children away from you. If you have left a relationship, they may make you feel guilty about keeping them away from the children, interfere with visitation time or custody, or threaten to make a false report to DCS. Economic or financial abuse. Economic abuse can include behaviors such as preventing you from working or forcing you to work, creating debt in your name, not allowing you to have access to money, or making you ask for money. Using privilege. Using privilege can mean treating you like a servant, bossing you around, creating strict relationship rules, threatening to out you, or using racism, sexism, or other biases against you. And finally, coercion and threats. Your partner may make or carry out threats to hurt you, threaten to take your life, threaten to report you to a government agency, or threaten to make a false accusation against you if you go against their wishes.
Now we know the power dynamic we're looking out for in the coming videos, so please stay tuned. If you or someone you know is a victim of domestic violence, please call your national hotline. In Australia, that is 1-800-RESPECT or 1-800-737-732. In Canada and in America, you can call 1-800-799-SAFE. That is 1-800-799-7233. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Suzanne Morphew, please call the FBI tip line at 719-312-7530.